Programming Throwdown, episode 156, Perl and Regular Expressions. Take it away, Jason.
Hey, everybody. I'm sure most people have tried ChatGPT or at least have seen it and
that?
Heard about it. Oh my God. So everyone's heard about this by now. Even my parents are asking me about it and everything. So that's how you know it's really reached everybody. And I was looking into it and I thought this would be really cool if I could use it to scan my email. Like I had a bunch of ideas. I also had some ideas of maybe scanning some internal documents at work. But then of course, all of my ideas either involve running it a zillion times, which I don't, want to pay for, or running it at work, which is not a good idea. So
Yes.
so I was looking around at open source and I came across a couple of options. So there's one called GPT-4all. It worked really, really well, amazingly well. I was really surprised because when the image thing came out, when DALL-E came out, the open source, text to image stuff was not good at all. And it's still not really in a good place compared to the one from OpenAI. But this one is awesome. And you can download it onto your laptop or your desktop. It doesn't use that much RAM. It's quantized. You don't need a supercomputer or anything. And you just ask it questions and it answers you. And it's pretty amazing. Like you just have it right there at your fingertips. I don't think it can run on a phone. I don't think it's that good, but it can run easily on most computers. The thing about GPT-4all was when I went to like fine tune the model, or train a new model, it didn't work. Basically, they have a bunch of config files that they didn't put into the repo, and it's just not in a place. Yeah, it's not in a place where you can really train it yourself. At least I couldn't figure it out. Also, I think the repo is literally a week old. So, it's not like it's really had a chance to go through its paces. So I found another one called Stanford Alpaca. And that one had, a better repo and also kind of explained how both of them worked. So I'll kind of walk folks through that real quick. So if you remember from the ChatGPT episode, you take these large language models, you give the results to humans, the humans like rank them, and then you use reinforcement learning to like tune the model to try to return things that people would rank highly. That's really expensive, right? You have to pay all these people to do that. And so what these two projects did, which is really clever, is they basically just asked ChatGPT questions and then got their answer. So and then they're basically trying to memorize ChatGPT's answers. So they start with a large language model and they say, oh, when I ask this, I expect that, and that is, ChatGPT's answer. Now, they don't like super overfit to that, so it's like memorizing, but they do that just to, try to recover that sort of like the ML term is bias, but like try to recover that niche that ChatGPT had, right? And it works really well. I was impressed. The Stanford one, you have to download the large language model. I got a BitTorrent of it. It was 300 gigabytes. So it downloaded over the night. Yeah. I don't even know why I'm doing this on my personal computer. This is probably never going to actually work. I think you need like some industrial strength computer, but I'm going to try it out. And the model download over the night. I haven't had a chance to use it or anything. But yeah, it's very accessible, way more accessible than the image and video stuff. And I think that's just because text is such an easier medium to operate in.
So is the idea like, I mean, I guess the stage like inference, like running it and asking it questions locally so that you don't have to send personal or company data up to the cloud. Okay, I get that. But is it accessible in the way where like I want to fine tune it on something or have it think more thoughtfully? Like, I guess there's two things, like setting up that problem and how difficult it is to set up fine tuning or training data. And then the second thing is actually like, do you need 6 GPUs and a bazillion gigabytes of GPU memory to be able to do those, or can you actually do it on your computer given enough time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know yet. Well, I'm gonna have to
Okay.
figure it out. But
Part one.
the asking questions thing is very accessible.
Okay.
But if you want to fine tune it, like let's say you wanted to read your internal company wiki and then, be in a position where you could ask it questions like, what are the repositories in my company, like the Git repositories in my company? That is the part that I haven't got to yet. They did say that you need a GPU with like a ton of RAM. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was an insane amount of memory for a GPU. So yeah, I'm not totally sure what's the best way to fine tune this. Like maybe you take this 300 gigabyte file and you put it on Amazon, and then you borrow an expensive Amazon machine.
Sure.
But then that Amazon machine now needs to be able to read your company wiki. Yeah, I have no idea how this is going to work, but I do think that there's something really powerful here.
So this is I mean, like, I don't want to say killer because everyone has the next killer app for all of this. But if you could come up with a way of doing this very like straightforward, having like internal search. So this thing you mentioned, maybe people who aren't at big companies don't sort of like have this problem or realize this problem. This is a problem I run into constantly. And you said just like, what are our repositories? But listing them is one thing. It's just like there's 5,000 tasks you need to do, but you don't need to do all 5,000 routinely. Maybe your team or sub team doesn't have that knowledge. So even just finding the team to ask, or maybe they've even gone ahead and put it on the wiki, like, here's how you set up your account and do all this. So just asking a question like, how do I do task A with dataset B? You can't go to Google and type that in because what you need is, like you pointed out, you need to create an account at this, go to this portal and fill in your information, which will create you this role. Then you need to go to this GitHub, clone this GitHub repository, and then run this command. And then your computer is authenticated and you do this. Asking a person on that team if you could find the right team is actually super straightforward. But finding that team, getting them to like answer your call, and then forcing them to like do that over and over again is like very difficult. So everyone says, why don't you put it up on a wiki? They go, well, we did. We put it on this wiki, but like you need to know the search terms to put into
Right.
what system exactly to find that. Like it's a just very difficult, subtle problem. And we tell folks on my team constantly, oh, put this up on a web page, put this in a wiki. And we do. And then we constantly field questions from other teams about like, well, why didn't you put it? And like we did here. Well, it's not in this form, or it's not linked into this hierarchy, and it's like, yeah, but how do I find out that you wanted it there? Like this is a very, very difficult problem, I would say, for large companies.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, totally right. I think another cool idea here is you could make your own Alexa. I mean, it's not connected to the internet, so
Sure.
it can't do anything like that. But you could make a little Raspberry Pi with a camera and not a camera, sorry, with a speaker and a microphone, and then you could have a little Raspberry Pi on the somewhere in the living room, and then you could say like Raspberry Pi, are humpback whales mammals or something, and it would just run this GPT for all, and it would just tell you what it comes out. It'd be pretty cool.
Do you know, is it capable? So like one of the things that I actually just don't know, and I've not found a good way to look up. If I ask a question that it does it need to already know it in the data it was trained on, or does it know how to like reach out, get information, synthesize that, and then like riff on that? So as an example, like what's the weather going to be tomorrow? It can't have trained on that, right? Like so
Right.
it would need to know how to reach out to a service, interpret that, and give me like is it capable of doing that? Like it can't if it doesn't have internet access. So, but if you gave it, does it know how to do that, or are we not there yet?
Not the open source one. So I think
Okay.
ChatGPT has like third party apps, like plugins that you could install. It's not totally clear to me how that works. Like how does ChatGPT? So yeah, that's a good example. If you say what's the weather tomorrow, how does ChatGPT know that it needs to, query your weather plugin for that? Not totally sure. Like, it might be kind of early days there where it's kind of, hand coded. Like maybe you look for certain triggers in the query, like old school conversational AI stuff. Like yeah, the kind of stuff we used when we played Zork, like That's probably what they're doing. And they're saying, oh, someone asked a question that's like has a lot of pluses and divisions in it. Let's send this to the Wolfram Alpha plugin or something. But yeah, that would be amazing if somehow, when you trained it. So what you'd have to do to get this right is in the training data, you would have to have, data for that particular plugin. So like right now they give, let's say, all of Wikipedia to the large language model. Well, maybe they would also give, 10,000 weather queries. And then the answer to those queries isn't like regular tokens, like the weather is clear, but it's actually like the answer is some special magic token that when ChatGPT sees that magic token, it knows it needs to ask the weather people for something.
Reaching out to the internet feels like a good segue to my first news article. So we'll take this as a forced time for news of the show.
News.
So my first article that I have is an open letter from, I guess, the AI community at large. I mean, I won't name drop like the specific people. It's not super relevant, but asking for a 6-month pause in what they call giant AI experiments. I don't know how you feel, Jason. Maybe you can go in a second, but just sort of like reading this article, this isn't my sort of domain. So I guess I would be a layman here, sort of like thinking through like the general societal implications here as opposed to the specifics of AI, but asking for, a 6-month pause and sort of making sure that we're ready and braced for the impact of the, I guess, societal changes and the danger of some of this. I mean, famously, I guess Elon Musk, who had a lot of early ties for OpenAI, but seems to now be saying he's not very associated with them and has some disagreements with them, which we won't dig into here. But I think he sort of has famously always said that he's worried that there's a very real danger that general purpose AI would sort of pose a danger to society and to humans. The exact nature of which seems to just slide from we can mock it for the silliness it does today to like all of a sudden, somehow all of us are it figures out how to launch the nukes and we all die, right? But I think this 6-month pause is really interesting, just as sort of like a thought experiment in my mind, which is like, what does that amount to? What is the like game theory of, let's say somehow government steps in and enforces OpenAI as a US company and a US government, to stop them. But what about other countries? Doesn't that like, they don't have, it's sort of like the kind of problem, and not to like, like the nuclear arms stuff, right? Like or climate change, sort of policies. All of these things can only be, whether you agree with them or not, they can only be as effective as the sort of enforcement or number of people who voluntarily, sign up
Right.
to doing it.
That's why it's called global, right? Global warming, because the whole globe has to participate.
Yeah, this is very like, what do they call it? I guess it sort of gets into tragedy of the commons. Like no single country cares enough to stop what they're doing, and in common. Okay, this is a side topic. So on this one though, I think this is very interesting, and I was reading some analysis of it by Scott Aronson, who I didn't know, who's the person we've talked about before on the show, who does a lot of talk about quantum computers and sort of like, are the experiments you see coming out, are they actually quantum computers? Or are they classical computers done in a quantum way? Like, and sort of some of those nuances there and what that all means, and P versus NP. And anyway, so he talks about all these kind of things. I didn't realize he has been working recently at OpenAI on, AI safety. But he sort of said, and a personal response to some of this, he has some good questions, which is why 6 months, not 6 years or 6 weeks? Like, what do we think is like the reason for 6 months? And just his analysis is like, this is a group of people signing on, but everyone actually kind of wants something different. And he had, and I'll steal this story from him, he had an anecdote that he talked to someone he knew from academia who said they signed the letter, and he asked them, and he's like, oh, no, I completely disagree with the letter. He's like, but I did a bunch of research for, Chat GPT 4. And I like the next Chat GPT 5 comes out, it ruins my research. Like, I just need 6 months because that's the time iteration cycle of like getting my papers out. So it's kind of funny because why that person signed it and why I saw, I don't know anything about this, like, oh, Steve Wozniak signed, this letter. Like those two people probably have very different like reasons and incentives for signing such an open letter. So it's just an interesting sort of like news article. It's very prescient today for like all of these things are saying, is it really the end? Is it the beginning? Is it a fundamental shift? Is it another personal 3D TV in your house for like it's just a fad and it's going to die out. VR is to be seen. We'll see what happens with that. But everyone's kind of like pontificating about what the implications of this all is.
Yeah, I mean, I would, when this show comes out, it'll be either on tax day or very close to tax day. So I think I would probably sign it just so that I could get some tax reimbursement from all these professors who won't be working for 6 months. Like we should get some kind of a kickback. No,
Oh.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's true. The 6 month, there's an interesting historical fact here, which is that countries that try to limit technology, it almost never works. Like I think the one that comes to mind is when China banned the steam engine back in the 1800s. They did it because they had kind of almost like we have the taxi medallion system,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
They had a guild for stagecoach, and wagon transfers and all of that. That was gilded, and the steam engine would completely decimate all of those jobs. And so kind of like for automation reasons, they banned the steam engine, and some people say that it set them back like over a century because the steam engine was just so important to like the industrial revolution, which then caused like this like exponential growth in tech. I feel like, yeah, that might happen again here. If someone tries to ban this technology, then whoever bans it might end up having a really hard time, recovering from that later. I feel like the answer is almost never to pause or ban things, but to then build more things. The constructive solution is almost always the long-term solution. I mean, to your point, the 6 month thing is by definition not a long-term solution. And so there was a Stanford, I think it's Stanford or Harvard. There was a researcher who, using ChatGPT and a bunch of student submitted assignments, they wrote a classifier to classify whether it was written by ChatGPT or not. And so now, like, K through 12 teachers can run student reports through this classifier, and it'll say whether ChatGPT wrote it or how much of it. Like, what's the likelihood that ChatGPT wrote it, and the spread, right? Like, did it write all of it? Did it write just one part of it? And so I think that is really, that entering that arms race is really, the long term solution.
I'll just say it and then drop it. But you're mentioning of banning the steam engine and setting things back is, I guess, like unintended kind of consequences. And there's some analysis too about people sometimes, again, not to keep doing it, but like Elon Musk is always railing against short sellers on Tesla stock. And so there's like this equivalent with futures and options on various crops. And some by law are banned from having futures markets on them because they successfully lobbied that it would basically cause more volatility. But in retrospect, actually, look, there's more volatility
Yep.
in the ones without, except then doubly look, there's like where and how the distribution is shaped is different. So like you get more very extreme price movements potentially in ones with options, but these sort of like average volatility. I'm going to get over my head here, but like the sort of like over time, just the general volatility you see is reduced. It's this very like, it's hard in these like very dynamic systems to predict what small changes will do.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. We'll have to see what happens. I mean, they're up to what was it? Something like 2,000 signatures. Yeah, 1,800 signatures as of when we're recording. So probably when comes out, they'll be up to 2,000.
Hey, maybe people here, it's like the like and subscribe. Because no, I'm just kidding. We're not advocating for you to go.
Yeah, if you have to pick one, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on this show. But if you want to do both, go for it. We'll post the link in the show notes. So related to this, I have a article from Vice that says AI Will Smith eating spaghetti will haunt you for the rest of your life.
Haunt is not the right adjective or adverb.
Yeah, it does stick with you though. So, we all talked about Dolly, and we talked about on this show even Dolly and Imagen, things that take text and generate images. So you could type in, a dog in a spacesuit on the moon, and it will generate an image like that. One thing I've done that's really interesting is you can type in things that are abstractions. Like I put in, love wrapped in like swirls of happiness. And then like it's like really interesting to see what kind of images come out of that. But these are just images. So what's the next level, the next dimension? That is time and video. And so someone has made the same kind of thing, but with video. The thing about it is, it's just you have to watch it. I mean, it can't really do it justice over the airwaves, but basically, it just moves in ways that are not Euclidean that really freak you out. And you look at the video. So someone put in Will Smith eating spaghetti. You look at the video, and it's definitely Will Smith eating spaghetti. I mean, it's completely
It is.
unambiguous, but it's just so odd. Oh man, what was your take when you first saw that?
I guess maybe it's like biased by if someone who shares a link tells you this is funny or that this is like horrifying. But the
Oh,
person
good
who shared it
point.
was like funny, and so then when I watched it, I'm like, indeed, this is like very funny. But as Jason pointed, it takes a minute, in my opinion. It's like you said, these concepts. It definitely like, oh, okay, Will Smith, a famous actor. If you know who it is, you'll recognize, or even if you don't know the name, you would probably recognize the person. But like, it's not really the person, so it's definitely picked up on like the attributes that make Will Smith recognizable. But if you take like a screenshot, like his face is distorted in very incorrect ways. So it's like preserving the recognizability, but it's clearly not like stitching existing video, or it's like hallucinating it, right? From like I guess that's like the latent space stuff. Anyways. And so,
Yep,
and
yep.
there's definitely spaghetti, but like the method is very unclear. Like he's not really using his hands or a fork. It's like just going in, like it's flying into his mouth. And his like the spaghetti is going through his mouth. Like
It's amazing.
it's just very like if
Oh,
you ask, it's one of those things I always talk about. Like, oh, AI is so dumb. It can't recognize a bird. My 5-year-old can recognize a bird. But if you ever had kids or look at like kids' pictures, it's very interesting what they decide to draw and how they do recognize. Like even to this day, my kids are a little older. I ask them like, oh, draw a picture of a person. Sometimes they're missing a neck. Like they don't understand like the like what makes a person a person. Or the famous one is, and I saw a clip where like I don't know if they did it often, but a news reporter asked a bicyclist who had just won a like long race, like the Tour de France kind of thing, right? And they come up with a piece of paper. Hey, in 10 seconds, can you draw a picture of a bicycle? This is someone who spends like their life on a bicycle. Like draw a picture of a bicycle, and it's actually very difficult for them to like put down the features that they, 2 wheels and a handlebar are great, but the geometry, the makeup, and this is
right, right.
not like a person who's never seen one before. This is someone who like tinkers hours, weight savings, like all this stuff, and they just like can't kind of get it correctly. And this sort of the same thing here. Like it's trained on these things, but it doesn't get it quite right.
Yeah, have you ever tried to draw the layout of your house or your backyard for somebody, like for, a contractor or anything like that? It's pretty much impossible. Like it's like you get the general thing like, okay, there's a bedroom and the bedroom connects this other room, and yeah, the bedroom is like smaller than the living room. But then it's like the thicknesses of the walls and stuff.
Your house isn't shaped like a rectangle. It's
Yeah. Yeah, it's like how thick the hallways are or how wide the hallways are, how thick the walls are in between the rooms. It's like we have zero concept of that in our mental model.
Yeah, it reminds me of if you ever watch like a SLAM video and when they close the loop. So like SLAM is simultaneous localization and mapping. So they're taking some, camera or LiDAR through rooms. And what you end up with is because it's not 100% accurate in the reckoning, that like rooms will be tilted and offset from each other. But then when you sort of like come at it via another path, it sort of snaps into place. And so I
Yep.
feel like what you're saying, it's like if you drew the flow of your house, like the graph connection is probably 100% accurate, like which rooms connect to which rooms.
Right.
But then you need like the shape and like some anchoring dimensions, and then you could probably like deform it into it pretty accurately. But they always say this, like people live hundreds of years in a house and don't realize there's a 3 foot gap where like $1 million is buried in the wall or whatever, because you just can't like spatially sort of like tell distances accurately enough to know that there's like some missing space in your room.
Yeah, that's yeah, totally right on.
Completely unrelated. My next article, I guess it is images, so we got a theme going.
Yeah.
So this image is someone posted robust image compression from implementation from an old NASA paper. I think it was called ICER, was what NASA had named it. Interestingly, when NASA developed stuff, it's like and I'm going to be very careful here. It basically should end up in the public domain because it's paid for by the
Right.
public, right? I think there are some caveats made for like things that would be military implications or security or
Sure.
whatever. But so they develop an image compression. And one of the things that you say, oh, okay, so it needs to be, if it's NASA, right? You think like space probes and robots on the surface of Mars and that kind of stuff. So the bandwidth is very limited, and that is definitely true. And it's very interesting to read how these videos and pictures we see get transmitted over time with budgets and allocations. And it's not like you have low speed connectivity all the time. You have like bursts of low speed connectivity and then long gaps. And so sending back initial stuff and then refining it over time, which is very interesting. So the kind of cool part was this person who didn't have as far as I can tell, like a ton of background in this, wrote a C library for it that implemented this image compression where you can kind of give it a budget and it'll try to do the best it can. But the other thing they pointed out that I found particularly interesting, probably just because of my background, is it being robust to like dropped packets. So we normally don't think about that. If you like take a JPEG image and you just like zero out one of the bytes randomly, or forbid like delete the byte and shrink the file, like you're not going to get an image. You actually just won't get
Right.
anything.
It'll be
You're not
just
going to get a
hosed.
crappy image. You just literally, it won't parse. You'll have an error. Your library, your computer might crash. I don't even know what'll happen.
Yep. Yep.
Hopefully not. But there's just like literally nothing in it. It's just built for reliable assumptions that all the data is preserved. There might be a checksum, right? So like maybe it'll know that it's not good and not render garbage, but you're certainly not going to get out just like a blurry image. And so what I thought was really cool here is thinking about a way of transmitting images or videos, which are sequences of images, in a way where like you don't have any assumption about packets getting through. Of course, if none get through, you get nothing. But like
Sure.
just randomly dropping one.
I love the idea. This is like this is really interesting. So I guess like the more packets you get, the more clear it is, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it would be cool for if you imagine there's like really low bandwidth radio links you can get for like I think what is it? I think LoRa is one of them, LORA, long range radio,
Okay.
LORA. But the bandwidth is very low, so they normally just use for like sensor reading, text message. But it would be cool to say like if you set up a camera at an edge node where maybe you had poor radio connectivity and you wanted to put a camera there and you wanted to like send back an image, but your connection sometimes gets through and sometimes doesn't have a ton of bandwidth. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities there. And it's funny how we take for granted. I saw the other day, you can go to the store for sort of animal watching, bird watching trail cameras, like get a security camera that you like strap to a tree that has like a cell phone subscription. And it'll like upload when there's motion, it'll like take a picture or a short video
Ah,
and upload it over your, cell phone connection plan that you buy. It's not a full plan, but and it's just like,
yeah.
wow. And you just go to the store, right? I think you just go to the, Best Buy or Walmart or whatever, and they have one of these. It's just like, this is crazy to me how fast this sort of changed.
Yeah, I love how it says this library was designed with embedded systems in mind, but it should function on normal systems too. It's like saying, yeah, this was designed for Perl, but it'll work on normal languages as
uh,
well. A little foreshadowing.
the embedded stuff there, I think, is the call out because it's not just the limited resources, but also things like embedded systems sometimes don't even have dynamic memory allocation. And you'd be surprised
Oh, I
how
see.
few like off the shelf libraries will work if you say you're not allowed to run new or malloc.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. All right, my second news is called Dig This Vegas. There's a bunch of these. I found out there's one in Texas. I'm going to try and go. But basically, these are kind of amusement parks where you get real life construction equipment. And so the one in Vegas, which a buddy of mine just came back from, um, they gave him an excavator and they put a car like a junkyard car on the ground and he gets to just demolish it. And so like as part of this experience they put you, I think you start in like a skid steer, and so you drive a skid steer through a track and then they have a bulldozer and you move some sand around, all that. And then they put you in an excavator and your job is to get to,
Job.
there's like yeah, Your goal is like there's inside the car there's a box, and you have to get that box by like tearing the roof of the car or throwing it around or something. And so they put you in this really heavy duty equipment, and you get to have fun for like 2 hours and do crazy stuff. So I thought this was really cool. There's one over here in Texas. I'm gonna take the kids at some point, but I got a real kick out of this. And if you're ever in Vegas, or there's one in Minneapolis, there's a bunch of them. If it's something that you'd be interested in, find out the locations and try it out sometime. It sounded really really awesome. I don't have any firsthand experience, but the idea just immediately clicked with me. So looking forward to trying this at some point.
Are you going to give the disclosure about that being a sponsored segment?
No, yeah, they're not paying us.
Unfortunately.
I wish they were. Yeah, maybe they should be. No, yeah. So this is totally unsolicited. We don't push any product here. So it's all legit.
No, just teasing Jason. I've seen something similar. I mean, that sounds cool. I've seen a similar one where I was somewhere, and I guess it makes sense because it's a relatively cheap thing to do. They go to, I assume, a thrift store. I'm just going to hope that they buy like damaged or broken, TVs, things that don't work anymore. And then you pay, and they put you in like a kind of like a jumpsuit, like safety goggles, and give you like a bat or a sledgehammer or an axe, and like we will give you a room, and in this room we're going to have like, you know, dishes and a TV and like a sofa, and you can just like go at it, like smash them, smash the. But they probably don't want you smashing the walls, but I assume they could build a fake wall if they wanted you to. So you pay for 15 minutes to just like take a sledgehammer to whatever's in this room, and it's like, wow. Apparently, there's malls today are having difficulties, so I assume like rent is pretty low, and so like they just put it. It's a very low overhead operation to grab a bunch of junk from somewhere and put it in a room and charge people to go smash it.
Yeah, coincidentally, I have a friend who's a physician, or not. Is that the right word? Basically, he's a surgeon. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. I have a friend who's a surgeon, and he works for a hospital in downtown Orlando. He told me that they got someone in who went to one of these things that you're talking about, and basically he swung the bat and it smashed the window of the car, and a piece of glass like flew up and like cut an artery in his neck or something. So I'm pretty sure lesson learned. I'm sure they take out all the glass now, but there was when this like first was a thing, somebody got like really really hurt. It just happened to be in Florida.
Well, on that happy note, it's time for book of the show.
My book of the show is How to Get in the Hospital. Now, my book of the show is It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. So I found this book fascinating. It's from DHH, and that's what everyone calls them, but I'm going to look up the actual person's name here for posterity's sake. David Heinemeier Hansen and Jason Fried. So basically, these are two folks who made Basecamp, the co-founders of the productivity software Basecamp. So a bit of background here. Basecamp is completely bootstrapped. So there's no VCs, there's no strategic investors, there's none of that. And so, that means there's zero pressure. It's not a public company. And so all they really have to do is make enough revenue to cover their expenses in terms of staying afloat as a company. So that gives them like a very different perspective. But, the book is all about different experiments that they have tried, in management. They tried doing unlimited vacation, and they found out it was a terrible idea, and they tried this other thing, they tried other thing. And so it kind of like walks through their journey starting Basecamp. Similar to the last book I recommended from Tony Fadell, it is rather prescriptive. They're constantly kind of telling you what to do, what not to do. And so you always have to take that with a grain of salt. I loved the anecdotes. They would talk about things that they did and what worked and what didn't. All the things that they tried, even the bad ideas, they make total sense. It seems completely reasonable to try any of these things. And so then hearing, how they succeeded or failed, or what, even the ones that succeeded, how they had to make changes over time, it was fascinating. I had a really great time reading it. I did finish the book a few weeks ago. So I read it cover to cover, and, it's relatively like what's the word, like homogenous. Like every chapter is kind of like a different story, but once you've read the first chapter, you kind of see the pattern. And so yeah, really good content. Recommend it.
And you've now become immediately disgruntled with your current employer?
Yeah. The one that really stuck with me was the unlimited vacation, because what they talked about is exactly what I would think would happen in that situation, which is, some
No one would.
people will take like, 2, 3, 4 weeks of vacation, just like normal. And then you have like a percent of people who will take no vacation ever, because that's the type of mentality they have. And then they get super burnt out. And so, the nice thing about you have 3 weeks of vacation or it disappears is that at some point someone's like working against their own interests by not taking it. So I thought that was pretty salient. But yeah, it was a great read.
All right, awesome. I have to check that out. Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of some of this stuff seems like it would make sense, right? First time anyone hears about unlimited vacation, I shouldn't say anyone. A lot of people probably like that would be amazing. And then it's like, yeah, but you do realize if you just if all you did was take vacation, you're going to no longer have a job. Like and it's
Yeah.
very difficult, like you said, to how do you deal with I don't want to say guilt, that's not the right, like how do you deal with some managers being like, yeah, sure, do whatever, and other managers being like, no. And so yeah, it does become very nuanced. Even with vacation, you have like how much is sort of socially acceptable to take at once. So most
Right.
businesses either give you a set amount a year and it expires each year, or you get some each year and it kind of builds up, and then there's like a max, and you, like you said, you have to either take it or lose it. But there is still some, like, I don't want to say uh, interaction negotiation about like, yes, you've earned 4 weeks of vacation because you haven't taken any for the last 18 months, but like taking it all at once is still a big ask rather than taking 1 week at a time. And so I think there's a lot of like, oof, a lot of difficulty in navigating the politics of that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one thing that is, really controversial, but I stand by it, is that I feel like in many ways it is a zero sum game. And so, people will say, well, we have this, we at Company X have this performance rubric. And if theoretically, everyone was greatly exceeded expectations according to our rubric, then Company X would get everyone a greatly exceeds expectation and everyone would get a 3 times bonus. But, you know, is it a coincidence that that never happens? Like, do you really think it's a coincidence that like there's always, the same relative, like pretty much distribution every single time? And even if that did happen, people want to get promoted, and there's the distribution of levels seems to stay the same all the time, right? So yeah, I do think that, given that there are parts of it that are, relatively zero sum, or we'll say low positive sum, then there's going to be a class of people who will just be as competitive as humanly possible. And what they'll like in the short term, and in the long term, they'll get, as I said earlier, like totally burnt out. And so yeah, it's really difficult. It's almost like getting someone to take medicine, you know. It's like it's bitter, but it's really important.
Mine is a fiction book, which is The Prince of Fools by Mark Lawrence, which is the first in a series called The Red Queen's War. I haven't read the follow up books, but this first book I did read. There was I should have looked up the no, the sisters. Oh man, why can't I think of the name? Anyways, I had recommended books by Mark Lawrence before that were in a series, and so this is another series by them, and it's a pretty interesting take in sort of it's not science fiction, but more fantasy. Oh, definitely fantasy.
Is the one you're
Uh,
thinking Holy Sister or Gray Sister?
yeah, that's one of them. Well, there's
Okay.
a series. That's all part of the same
Oh, you're
series.
right. There's Red Sister. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the series though. That was what I was searching for. It failed me. Didn't have my notes together. So the Prince of Fools is this Red Queen's War #1. They're introducing sort of a new world, this new concept. I think Mark Lawrence does a pretty good job of this sort of like setting a very interesting, not grim world, but kind of like things are sort of like oppressive and problematic, and you don't kind of always understand why or what all is going on. And then as the story progresses, you sort of get that feeling of like learning more and understanding the way the systems work. And I think that's repeated here. So I'm looking forward to reading the rest of this series. But there are kind of like two main characters here that are interesting dynamic because one is sort of like a privileged, spoiled person, and the other is sort of like a very gruff, like raised on hard times, kind of like a Norse warrior. And they kind of have to like end up going at things together and helping each other, even though like normally they wouldn't be associated. And so I found it a really nice read, and looking forward to reading the rest of the series.
Nice. So is this a completely separate thread, or did you have to read the sister books first?
No, well, I haven't yet even seen any references to the other one, so
Got it.
I don't think it's in the same universe. I think that's the way of sort of saying it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, very cool. Do you think this is a good one for people who are just getting into like I guess dark fantasy or epic fantasy?
Oh, ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. This is hard. This is like asking we answer this one, but like it's still a hard one for me. Like, what would you do today to get into programming? And it's like when I got
Right,
into it
right.
and today it's like very different. So it's hard. So I've been reading fantasy for a very long time. So I'm not sure that I'm called. I'd have to think. I'm sorry, I don't have a good response, Jason. I don't know.
No problem.
Good question. I just don't know how to answer it.
I think maybe one answer is just any book that you pick up is going to be a good first book. So if you're out there and you're looking for a really good hobby, this is a great way to get started.
I would say that like having a book that pulls you in and like regardless, you'll sort of make it through. I saw someone pointing out that there's a weird cultural thing, and I don't know how global it is, but that people have this thing when they start a book that they feel they got to finish it, like they want to finish it. Even if they don't like it, they won't start a new book until they finish the first book. And so like you get in this catch 22 where like it's hard to make it through this book, so therefore you're not reading as much, and they're like just very weird dynamic.
Oh,
And I was
interesting.
like, oh yeah, actually I do feel this way. Like when I start a book, I just really want to finish it. And someone was pointing out you should give it X pages or X hours of reading. And if you don't like it, just put it down. Don't finish it. Who cares? But I will say there have been some books that I really, really liked that took a long time to get into. That like, a third of the book was, and I would love to critique them and say they should have done it differently or whatever. But it's sort of like you probably wouldn't have had the payoff if you hadn't gone through the stuff. So I don't know how I feel about that assessment, but I definitely do fall into the camp of like I want to finish a book. I don't like putting a book down even if I don't like it. I've only done it once or twice.
Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. I have a bunch of unfinished books.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe I think that there is a fault the other direction too, where if I read a book and it's not really like holding my interest, then I'll just move on to the next book. And then part of it is if you check out a book from a library, then if you don't finish it in time, it just goes back to the library, and
Mm.
that's I think a big cause of it. Well, if you like these books, you should definitely check out our affiliate links. So if you want to, get into epic fantasy or you want to read about it, doesn't have to be crazy at work. Please go to our show notes and click the link. That helps us out. That I don't exactly know how Amazon does it, but if you click the link, Amazon rewards us through some way of doing it. So we appreciate that. And if you don't want to go through, or if you already have these books, you can support us through Patreon. Or even if you do have the books, you can always support us through Patreon. That is patreon.com/programming throwdown. And we appreciate everyone's support.
Yes, thank you to everyone.
Yeah, with that, we have the tool of the show. My tool of the show is actually a piece of hardware.
What?
Yeah, it's the Remarkable 2. It's really interesting. Again, we're not, sponsored by them or anything, so this is totally organic. But it's very simple. All it is a e-ink display that has like a touch screen, and it's somehow set up so that the pen can write to it, but like your palm of your hand or your finger like don't accidentally mess things up. So they have some palm rejection, I think is what it's called. But you can write really well. It's extremely responsive. And then on the back end, it can OCR your notes and turn them into text and everything. I haven't, to be honest, used any of those features, but the thing I really like about it is, you can have very easy random access to all of your pages. So I used to use, I'll hold it up, even though we're an audio podcast, I'll hold it up anyways, just for my own sake. I used to use, these little composition books. And so I have like a ton of notes in them, things I want to remember, things from discussions I've had. But then, I'm kind of flipping pages, and this is just so much easier. So I have, my notes, I have each page in this kind of organized. And so if I want to go to another page, I just click on the name with the pen. I'm really digging it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of pricey. I think it was. I didn't buy a cover or anything like that, but I still think it was something like $400 or $500. But I'm getting a lot of use out of it. Constantly taking notes at work, and so yeah, I feel like I am getting my money's worth. And overall, it's a beautiful experience.
Do you have any thought of? I saw Amazon released a Kindle version, the Scribe, that sounds very similar. Do you have any like why one over the other? One wasn't available when you bought the other.
Yeah, it's a good question. The Kindle Scribe was pretty new when I was looking. And so, it was a tough debate. I think ultimately I knew somebody who was really happy with the Remarkable, and so that's really what pushed me in that direction. I mean, part of it is if I'm going to read a book, it'll almost certainly be an audiobook. So that was another factor. I think if you are a reader, the Kindle Scribe makes more sense. Like this thing, I think you can put PDFs on it, but it's not designed for that. It's not very convenient. So if you're going to read, I think Kindle Scribe might be a better option. I think it's a little bit cheaper too, but I haven't tried it, so I can't vouch for it. The Remarkable works really, really well, and definitely get the pen with the eraser. So it costs a little bit extra, but I'm constantly kind of going through and erasing different lines and replacing them and everything.
Nice. I didn't realize we could do actual tools. Interesting. For a tool of the show. My tool of the show is a game. I checked. I don't think I've recommended it before. So here it is, Slay the Spire. This is not a new game. This has been out for many years now. But I actually got back into it. I was traveling and looking for something that was like easy enough to sort of use while I was traveling on an airplane, that kind of stuff. And this is I guess you call it a card game, but it's a card game that you wouldn't build physically. I guess they might try to do a version of it, and you sort of. I guess it's a rogue like game or a rogue game in that as you progress through your journey, you can add cards to your hand. You can sort of figure out what you want to focus on. You kind of build up points, and then when you die, you can, improve your character in some way. And I was having a really, really difficult time. Like I was actually like kind of put it down. I was playing it again. Again, I really sucked at it. So I like did a little bit of Googling for like some tips and realized like, oh, okay, there's a few main characters that you kind of like unlock. And actually the first one they were saying is much harder to feel progression about. And so they were recommending the second one. I picked up, trying to play with the second character. And sure enough, like it clicked. I was like, oh, I understand a lot more. Part of these games is playing through them enough to understand like what's ahead because you're sort of
Right.
making choices. And if you don't know what's up ahead, it's like it's a sort of like you talked about the book. You got to play it enough to understand the dynamics so that you understand like you can't just pick randomly and or whatever looks cool. You got to kind of focus for a direction, and it's hard to have a direction if you don't know like what the pacing is like or how often you can heal or these kinds of things. Anyways, Slay the
Yeah.
Spire. Probably most people have heard about it or played it, but I enjoyed it. And once you sort of like get into it, you can actually just like kind of play quickly, and you sort of like get to more the strategy and a little less the like, okay, what do I do on each turn? I'm looking at all my cards. You know what they all say. You can sort of play them very quickly. And so the pace picks up.
Oh, very cool. I've been getting into Hearthstone, which is somewhat similar, although it's not episodic.
Oh, yeah. Another oldie but a goodie. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it's good times. I don't play with other people though because I'm not really competitive, but the single player is actually pretty fun. The nice thing about the single player is that you know that every level is either neutral or in your favor, and you're not
Mm.
going to get completely unbalanced cards.
I played similar exactly to as you described Hearthstone a while, and I put it down, and I've not picked it up again. I don't think you can really play it offline, which to me is hard when like a lot of the times I can play is like when I'm on an airplane or
It's
whatever,
true.
internet
Yep.
connectivity is getting better. But um, I felt there was still like a compulsion to like get the reward loop unlock stuff to do at least some multiplayer gaming. Like oh, you should go into a battle, you should at least try to win one a day or one a week or during this time frame,
Yep.
you get these unlocks. And even though they probably didn't matter, because like you said, they're like pre-canned for a lot of the single players, I still felt like I was missing out. And so I dropped it.
That makes sense. All right, on to Perl and regular expressions. What's your history with Perl? Like, have you used it for any projects?
So when I was first getting into, I guess, Unix like operating systems, I felt Perl came like reasonably recommended, but I always kind of resisted it for the purposes of scripting and kind of got more into in the early thing just using Bash. And it always felt like using something that came with it was a little easier. And I was at the time a C programmer. And so anyway, so Perl sort of always floated on the periphery. And, yay old Patrick would go onto the internet, dog pile and search, like something and get a Perl one-liner, right? So
Right.
rather than using sed and awk, someone would give me a Perl one-liner and I would have no clue what it said, and I would run it. But I always sort of like bounced around where people would talk about using Perl and kind of interacting with it. But I just never sort of like got heavily into the development. But yeah, that was sort of my history. What about you?
It's about the same. Yeah, I think I'd mainly use Perl as a few kind of scripts to manipulate some text. The big use case that I had for Perl is where exactly where someone will come like I'll want to in a huge string or a huge like group of files. I want to like replace foo with bar and all the files, and then you can use sed and all of that. But sometimes it just there's certain things maybe, and I think it's gotten a lot better. But there was definitely a period of time where Perl regular expressions could do things that sed couldn't. And so it's like at some point you would try to do something that you read on the internet and it wouldn't work in sed, and you'd have to like go to Perl. Even actually pretty recent, the Mac version of sed, the one that comes with Mac or comes with FreeBSD,
Oh, this is, yeah.
is like not doesn't have all the features, and so you have
It's
to
not
go
fully
and get
compatible. Yeah.
yeah, you have to get GNU sed and then run gsed. And so Perl doesn't have that problem. Like Perl has every version of Perl, reasonable version of Perl has all the regular expression stuff.
When we were researching for this show, I tried like looking for evidence or proof and I couldn't find any. But one of the things that I always sort of felt like that the earliest example of, I don't want to say dependency management, that's too strong, but like having a programming language where it wasn't just what was sort of as shipped, that there was like, and not even like Python talks about the concept of like batteries included and having all these things. But today we think about Python, and no one that I know develops Python without like having using, I guess that's PyPy through pip or some other distribution environment where they go out and pull down modules. Node, even probably more so with the Node package manager,
Yep.
npm. But I going all the way back to like my earliest memories, again, couldn't find any defense of it. But Perl had the CPAN, and the CPAN was like where you could go to get like the modules, the downloads someone else had written, something that did a thing, kind of like plugins, I guess, or today we kind of know these are very common, but that was the comprehensive Perl archive network. And it was a way for, kind of like dynamically for you to grow the compatibility of your programming language and sort of pull down stuff that added capabilities or features or stuff that wouldn't have come out of the box. And again, I already kind of mentioned coming at this from like being a C programmer, even to this day, even in C++, this is still like not how things are done. Like in C++, you don't go like, oh, let me run some command. They do exist. It's just not the regular use of most C++ programmers. But like, you can't just, I think Conan is an example. Like, oh, I'm going to run this Conan command and download this other thing into my, project and have all this other capability. That's just not how it's sort of done. But it was
Yep.
cool that Perl had this. And I feel like this has become just the way it is today. But back when Perl and the CPAN were kind of like in the zeitgeist, I feel like that was a pretty unique play.
Yeah, totally right. Yeah, I think that was one of the great contributions of Perl was that it kind of created this network effect. Yeah, I think that culminated with GitHub, where now you can create a
Oh man.
project on GitHub. Everyone's looking on GitHub for projects, and it kind of creates this whole network.
No, I was noticing the other day on like the GitHub thing is how much easier it is to find snippets of code. We had open source projects before, right now, like, well, I'm an old person, but you would go to, like, remember, like SourceForge, but like SourceForge, but it had like was that an SVN repository? I don't even remember. And you would sort of like, you could clone it. Well, that's not
Yep.
what it was called. Download it and then look at the source code. But who did that? Now, when you search on GitHub, like the source code is just right there, and you can just click. You can get some snippet. You can figure out how to do something, right? Like Stack Overflow snippet. I feel like it's just crazy how much different it is than kind of the way it used to be.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Oh, the other thing that has always kind of stood out to me about Perl is how Amazon.com is built on Perl. And I would talk to people who work at Amazon, and they would say, "Yeah, it's a, I mean, yeah, obviously, the database is not written in Perl or something, but like,
What?
the the back end, front end web stuff is all in Perl." And that blew my mind because it's really an outlier. But yeah, I think I'm sure Amazon hires just tons and tons of Perl people even to this day.
Is that like the Facebook runs on PHP, but it's sort of like a often heavily modified, whatever? Or do they really just like bog standard Perl? Do you know?
They've got to have something, right? They've
Okay.
got to have something because at that scale, even if you make the compiler 1% faster, that probably saves them enough money to justify, some engineer working on that full time. But yeah, I think the syntax is still very Perl like. So yeah, I mean, getting back to our use case, I primarily so Perl has this thing they call it Perl dash pi. It's actually Perl, dash p dash I dash e, and you can just string them all together. And I'm gonna try and see if I get this right. I think the I was interactive. I don't remember exactly what it was, but basically you could do Perl dash pi. You give it a regular expression, and then you give it a directory, and it will just execute that on the whole directory. So you could do it's similar like set and awk. You can do Perl dash pi, substitute, foo with bar on this directory, and it'll just go through and just take care of that for you. And I felt like definitely back in the day that was extremely powerful and useful. Like imagine you have let's say you have some text content. Maybe it's coming out of your top command or something, and it's showing you, your processes and what CPU they're using, and you have a log of this, and you want to put it into Excel. So you want to create like a comma separated value. So you want to take, these maybe it's tab separated. You want to make it comma separated. Perl dash pi will just knock that out for you very quickly. And set and awk could do that too, but it has the issues we talked about earlier.
I didn't realize it was three different commands just squished together, like a P flag, an I flag, and an E flag. It just happens to spell like a
Yeah.
word. So today I learned.
Yep.
But yeah, very powerful. And I think like this thing that you're pointing out, which is inextricably kind of linked in with Perl and its history, at least in my mind, but I feel like most people I talk to's mind, is no one talks about Perl without talking about regular expressions. Like that
Yep.
is the like even these use cases we're sort of saying, well, not the Amazon one, but the other ones Jason is pointing out is all about like regular expressions and pattern matching and replacing and that kind of workflow.
Yeah, totally. And so that's one, Perl really popularized regular expressions, but I would say, in the long run, the regular expressions is really the lasting legacy. And it's an extremely powerful system that really every engineer should learn and get familiar with.
So for those who don't know or haven't ever used a regular expression before, can you maybe like go, is that even like possible? Like the 30,000 foot, like what is a regular expression? Why do we have that as a named concept?
Yeah, I think that so find replace is obviously really important. Simple example, let's say you created a variable or a function name is even a better example. You created a function a while back, and the function was something like replace circle with square float or something is the name of your function. And then later on you find, oh, I actually want to use doubles. I want to replace all the floats with doubles in my program. So I want to change this function name, but I also need to change all the people who are calling this function. So if your function name is unique enough, you could say, just go in your text editor and say go in all the files and replace, find circle with square, replace circle with square, float with replace circle with square, double. And so it goes through and replace all those strings. But sometimes, when you're in the habit of doing that, especially for refactoring, you can get busted. Like imagine if your function name was, square root. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to go through my whole hard drive and replace square root or even this project or replace square root with something else. Like it's just going to be total pandemonium, right? But if you could do something a little bit more advanced, like maybe, there's places where you have, square root in a comment, or there's places where you have square root that's a variable name. So I want to say like, let's actually look for square root with an open parenthesis. And so like you start getting more and more complicated, find replace type things. Like another example is maybe I want to find like contiguous sections of white space and replace all of it with a comma. So if I have, Patrick space, 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 Wheeler, I don't want to have like comma, 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 comma. I just want to have one comma for that whole block, right? So you can imagine like a whole bunch of scenarios like this, and regular find replace just can't do it. And so regular expressions were designed to do kind of text processing, you know, more advanced text processing that we can't just simply do with find replace.
Yeah, so I guess if I riff on that, it's if you go in your text editor and you special key F, whatever that is on your control or what is it, command in Mac OS, and you find something, it is like doing substring matching, right? So it's looking for like
Hmm.
a contiguous set of characters, so one space or two spaces or A, then the letter B. But what Jason is calling out is sometimes that's not powerful enough because, as an example, if you wanted to eliminate a word in a comment and you don't know where in the comment it takes place, and let's say I'll use the example of C++, and we know that we use the backslash at the start of the comments in our project, then what I want to say is I want to find backslash, but then I want to skip to anywhere in that line where the word, foo is, and I want to replace it with the word bar. There's no way for you to do like control F or control R for find and replace. There's no way for you to specify in the normal default behavior of most of those to say, look here at the beginning of the line, skip some stuff, and then match this. Like that kind of matching isn't
Right.
supported. So a lot of them do have the option of going into a regular expression mode where you kind of write this, and that's a useful feature. But as Jason is pointing out, you need a special grammar or a special language for describing these more complex operations.
Yeah, I actually want to interject like one kind of story here. When I was a junior engineer, I would get really, really frustrated when people would ask me to refactor things in pull requests. Is they would say like change the name of this function or indent in this way or whatever. And the reason why I was getting so frustrated is because it took me a ton of time, and
Mm.
especially if somebody said, oh, like actually, I liked it. So this happened to me one time where they said, "Oh, actually, I liked it better the other way." It had to do with there was a variable that was plural, and so they wanted me to make it plural. So let's just say make it simple. Like instead of apple, they wanted me to make it apples. And then when we actually looked at how it was used, they decided, "Oh no, I actually want to make it apple." And so I, not knowing regular expressions it was taking me hours to make this change, and I was getting really frustrated. And it made me kind of frustrated at the whole refactoring thing in general, to the point where I was kind of like, look, this is like, I guess I'll put my researcher hat on. Like, look, the code works. The numbers are like statistically accurate. Like, I don't care whether the variable name is apple or apples, right? But, really, I do care about the code quality. It's just that I didn't have the tools to do that efficiently. And so I care about the code quality if it's going to take me 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I don't care about the code quality if it's going to take me a whole day or 3 days, right? And so I learned regular expressions way, way too late. And so I guess it's a public service announcement. Learn regular expressions. You'll end up writing much better code as a result.
So one of the things about Regular expressions that I never got into, but I always find interesting is there is like a formalism built out around them where, we're describing very common end programmer operations where you want to run something, but sort of building parsers and the language and the grammars of all this. I don't think we're going to necessarily talk about here, but like I just point out to people that that is like a thing that you will run into or hear people talking about various ways of kind of doing these. Or if you ever going to write a domain specific language or some sort of thing where you're not just writing sort of a text input, but actually like something that helps script or run some of your programs, you'll kind of run into a lot of the more academic approaches. And regular expressions are sort of a end use implementation, of which there are a couple flavors. There's like a Unix flavor and the Perl flavor of exactly like what the special characters are, but it's part of this larger academic grammar for sort of actually doing these kinds of operations like pattern recognition and matching.
Yep, yep. Another thing that regular expressions does really well that's hard to get anywhere else is the grouping and the back references. And so the way this works is, if you're also replacing, so if it's a find and replace, you might find a certain like actually Patrick, your example was pretty good. Like you might say, okay, find a line where it starts with, a couple of slashes, and so I think there's what is it, the caret sign? I think the caret. So another thing about regular expressions is there's a ton of special characters, and you can escape them out to treat them as regular characters. But if you don't do that, they mean something completely different than look for a caret. So if you see the caret symbol, it actually means this only matches if it's the beginning of the line. So you might say caret slash slash dot star, and so dot means it could be any character, star means any number of any characters or any number of whatever came before, and then foo, right? So I'm looking for a string that starts with the slashes, so it's a comment, and then has something else, and then the output's foo. Now if I want to replace that with something else, right? If I want to replace foo with bar, right, I need to keep all that other stuff. Like if I just say take that expression and replace it with bar, it's going to destroy the slashes and the dot star. Like my whole comment's going to be destroyed leading up to foo, and I'm just getting up with bar. And then when I run that, it's gonna compile error because I lost the slashes, right? So you can create what's called a group. So you can say look for something that starts with the slashes and anything, a wild card, and call that group one, and then look for foo after that. And then I want to replace that with group one, whatever that was, and then bar. That's the back reference. And so you can do these like really intricate find replaces using regular expressions, and that ends up being extremely powerful.
I think also like the common, you were talking about refactoring, but like the common thing is like if the thing you're trying to find and replace is like a substring of some other common thing in your code base, I think this is where the regular expressions really help, as Jason's mentioning, like capturing that like I'm looking for this only at the start of a word, so it needs to follow a white space or it needs to be before an open paren. But then also sometimes if you are trying to like apple to apples is a good example. Is that idempotent? What is the phrase where it's like if you replace apple with apples and you run that twice, you will get a lot of occurrences where you get apples s like apple
Right, right.
ss because apple is a subset of the word apples. And so this is where it's really powerful. But also these back references and capturing this group of text allowing you to repeat stuff. So whatever you found after this, like capture it and then like put it back twice. Like I want to repeat that thing or I want to put it as part of some other something. So if I wanted to, I wouldn't encourage you to do that. But like if you were thinking about switching like from snake case, right? Is that right? Where it's the underscores to camel
Right.
case. So it's like if it's a start of the group or an underscore, then that whatever's next. Like imagine trying to do that like Jason described. It would take you hours and hours to like search your whole code base for underscores, ignore most of them, find the ones where they're variable names, like do these fixes. I'm not saying doing that with regular expressions would also be really easy. That's probably could be reasonably tricky if you don't know what you're doing, but it would be at least, approachable.
Yep. And there's definitely times where I've been able to use some clever regular expressions, and it is indistinguishable from magic, or maybe indistinguishable from hours of labor. There was one case in particular where we were using PyTorch, and PyTorch has there's a build system called Bazel for building code, and so we're using Bazel, and PyTorch has Bazel as well, but the Bazels like didn't quite match, right? There were some differences, and you ended up having to basically I ended up having to rename like pretty much anything that had PyTorch in the build files. I had to kind of give it a prefix so that there wasn't a collision with this other thing. And so using some like clever regex, I was able to do that, and it ended up being a 65,000 line PR.
Oof.
But it was just like in the PR description, I just put the regex, and so it's just like, and I purposely like made a PR that all it did was this regex. That way, it's not like mixed in with real work, right? Yeah, and I mean, I mean, to do that by hand, right? 65,000, it would have been just intractable. We would have had to find another way around it. So regexes are super powerful. Highly recommend people learn them. And one really good way to do that is through these. Have you seen these, Patrick? These websites where you can put in sample text and regexes, and in real time on the website, it'll show you the matches and the references and everything.
Oh, I've seen one that was like a tutorial, but this one that you've got here in the show notes, this is awesome. This is like Godbolt, but for like regular expressions. Oh, this is awesome.
Wait, it's like what?
Oh, no, do your thing. This will make sense. I'll tell you at the end.
Oh, okay.
The Godbolt is like you put in like a C or C++, and it'll like run it through a compiler and show you like the internal workings of it, like whether it
What?
succeeded or
Really?
not, do the decompiling. Yeah, like you can check if how loop unrolling does or doesn't work given different like compiler versions or pragmas.
Oh, that is super cool.
It settles a lot of debates about what's faster.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd never heard of that. That's really interesting. Is it called? It's called Godbolt.
Godbolt, yeah.
Okay, I just TIL. Today I
Okay,
learned.
sorry.
Um,
There's a
yeah.
complete
So
distraction.
so Regex Explorer, the way it works is you put a sample, and oh, by the way, one thing we didn't mention is you can even do multi-line matching. So even if you have something really complicated that's multi-line, you can get it done. It gets tricky, but it's doable. But you can put some sample text, and then as you're writing your regex, this is just running in the browser. It's not copying anything to the server or anything. While you're writing your regex, it's real time, showing you, here's what you're matching, here's what the groups are if you want to reference them in your replace string, and here's what the replace string looks like if you're doing a find replace. So if you're doing a find, it'll also tell you whether this line would have been found or not, or this part of this line. Extremely useful. I mean, one thing that we didn't quite talk about with regex and Perl is, or maybe I'll just say regex. It's extremely difficult to read. Reading a regex and trying to understand what it's doing is very, very hard. Typically, if I have a regex, I'll almost always put a comment in front explaining like what
Yep.
I was trying to do with this regex, because otherwise it's like slash bracket regular bracket ABC B dash Z close bracket slash close bracket. It's like it's this almost like hieroglyphics. And so the nice thing is you can take any regex, put it into this website, and then put some sample text and see what matches and start to triage.
That's like a definitely good advice. Don't use regexes in your code to show off. Like if you use them, like describe them. I'm
Right.
not saying don't use them. That might be a bit too far. But I read some code base the other day that was using the ternary operator, where you like put a Boolean expression, and then if it's true, you do the first thing, and if it's false, you do the second thing. And it's like a way of writing one-liners. It almost never is not replaceable with an if-else. And so it was very frustrating because it takes 30 seconds to read what it's saying instead of the 5 seconds of reading the if-else statement. And they didn't write a comment. They didn't, anything. And it's like, why? And the regex is the same thing. Even if you know what you're doing, you also, if you want someone to review it, not saying what you think it does requires a person to decompile it in their head, determine if that matches what they think the code should be doing. It's an extra step. If you write what you think it's doing, then they can just check that it matches that and then proceed. And that's actually just like a much better approach.
Yep. I've started even, I don't know if the one I linked has this. I'm pretty sure it does. But as you're going through, you can, or maybe there's a button somewhere. There's basically a button where you can share the state of your regex, exploration. So if you put in some sample text and you put in, a regex, you can click this button. Now, I do think clicking the button causes them to save the sample text. So if your sample text are like government secrets or something, it might not be a good idea. But you can click this, create like a shortcut URL, and then you could put that URL in the source code comments and say, like, this is the intent here. That's even better because now it takes people straight to that regex and they can see the decompiled result. I've often now like gotten in the habit of putting either links to something like this or links to Wolfram Alpha. You'll see this in code all the time where it's like, like angle equals, and then it's like cosine divided by this times this, and then to the power of that. And then people are just kind of scratching their head. So things like that, I'll put a link to Wolfram Alpha. Yeah, I think for big equation, maybe the salient point here is treat a regular expression like a complicated math equation, and kind of give the right context.
Man, you got the life pro tips buried here down at the end of the podcast, man.
Yeah, people got to stay till the end. They have to listen to.
Yeah, stay to the end. Great tips at the end.
That's right. Yeah, producer, please make a note of that. Let's make sure folks catch the end of it.
Are you just talking to yourself now, Jason? Yeah, okay.
Oh, man. Very cool. Well, this was awesome. Yeah, I think we covered a language that we've this was a user request. Actually, it's a multi-user request. Over the years, tons of folks have asked us to talk about Perl. I think you can't talk about Perl without talking about regular expressions, and so we're able to kind of cover both of those, like almost a double header here. And thanks everyone for listening, staying till the end, and we appreciate it. And thanks again for all your support.
See you next time.
Music by Eric Barndollar.
Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix and adapt the work, but you must provide attribution